On the glittering stage of New York high society, they were the ultimate power couple. Julian Vance, the self-made tech billionaire, and his elegant wife, Eleanor. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece of wealth, influence, and tradition. But behind the doors of their Park Avenue penthouse, a corrosive secret was eating away at the foundation of their two-decade marriage. When Julian made the shocking decision to discard his wife for his much younger, ambitious mistress, Chloe Sterling, he believed he was simply upgrading his life. He couldn't have been more wrong. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of how one man's colossal mistake of the heart triggered a spectacular backfire, proving that in the world of the ultra-rich, revenge is a dish best served on the stock market. The air in the Vance's Upper East Side penthouse was always meticulously controlled temperature, humidity, and most importantly, the emotional atmosphere. It was a space that smelled of ozone from the air purifiers, old money from the leather-bound books Eleanor collected, and new money from the sharp minimalist art Julian favored. Tonight, on the eve of the annual Children's Legacy Charity Gala, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension that no filtration system could scrub away. Julian Vance, founder and CEO of the tech behemoth Aura Innovations, stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a tumbler of Macallan 25 in his hand. At 48, he still possessed the restless energy that had propelled him from a garage in Queens to the cover of Forbes. He watched the city lights ignite below a kingdom he felt he had conquered single-handedly. Eleanor Vance entered the room, a vision of composed elegance in a deep sapphire gown by Oscar de la Renta. At 45, she wore her life story with a grace that Julian had once admired and now found stifling. She was the daughter of old New York wealth, the one who had provided the initial seed money from her trust fund, the one who had introduced him to the right people, the one who had sanded down his rough edges. "The car is waiting, Julian," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. She adjusted one of his cufflinks, a familiar, intimate gesture that suddenly felt like a formality. He didn't turn. "I'm not going." Eleanor paused. Julian never missed the Legacy Gala. It was their signature event, the one where they presented a united philanthropic front. "Not going. Are you feeling unwell?" "I feel fine, Elle. I just can't do this anymore." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes was one she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not frustration, but a chilling, resolute distance. "This. Us." The three words hung in the opulent silence, more shocking than a scream. Eleanor felt a cold dread snake up her spine, a feeling she'd been suppressing for months. It had started with the late nights he claimed were board meetings, the hushed phone calls he took on the terrace, the scent of a perfume, a cheap, sweet gardenia that wasn't hers, lingering on his shirts. "What are you talking about, Julian?" she asked, her own voice betraying a slight tremor. He downed the rest of the scotch in one gulp, the sound of the glass hitting the marble-topped bar echoing like a gavel. "I want a divorce." Eleanor sank onto the edge of a custom-designed sofa, the sapphire silk of her dress pooling around her. She thought of their children, Leo 20 at Princeton and Amelia 18 in her final year at Brearley. She thought of the 2 decades they had built, the shared jokes, the private griefs, the empire that was as much hers as it was his. "There's someone else," she stated. It wasn't a question. He had the decency not to lie, but not the courage to look her in the eye. "Her name is Chloe Sterling. She's different. She understands the world I live in now. The pace, the drive. She isn't afraid of disruption." The subtext was clear. "You are old news. You are the past." Chloe Sterling. Eleanor knew the name. A 26-year-old marketing influencer who had done some campaign work for Aura's lifestyle division. Eleanor had seen pictures of her, all bright white teeth, surgically enhanced curves, and a voracious ambition in her eyes. She was a human embodiment of everything Eleanor was not: loud, trendy, and disposable. "So you're throwing away 22 years for a disruption?" Eleanor's voice was laced with a bitterness that surprised even her. "This is not an impulse decision," Julian said, his tone shifting into the cold corporate register he used in hostile takeovers. "I've had Marcus Thorne draw up the papers. Our prenup is ironclad, as you know. It protects Aura Innovations completely. You will, of course, be compensated generously. The house in the Hamptons, the Aspen condo, a significant alimony settlement. You'll be very comfortable." He spoke of their life as if it were a portfolio of assets to be liquidated. The word generous felt like an insult. She wasn't a retiring employee. She was his wife, the co-architect of their world. "And our children, Julian? Are they part of your generous compensation package? The children are adults. They will understand." But Eleanor knew they wouldn't. They adored their father, but they revered their mother. They saw the partnership for what it was. This would shatter them. "I will not be discussing this further tonight," Eleanor said, rising to her feet with a dignity that felt like a shield. "You may have Marcus Thorne send the papers to my lawyer. I believe you remember Beatrice Croft." The mention of Beatrice, a notoriously sharp and unyielding divorce attorney from a rival old money family, wiped the smugness from Julian's face for a fraction of a second. He had expected tears pleading. He had not expected a declaration of war. Eleanor walked out of the room, her back ramrod straight. She didn't slam the door. She closed it softly, a final quiet act of a life that was now over. As she stood in the marble foyer, the reality crashed down on her. The penthouse felt alien, a gilded cage built by a stranger. Downstairs, the doorman would be holding the door of the waiting town car, expecting Mr. and Mrs. Vance. But Mrs. Vance, as she had existed for 22 years, had just ceased to be. In her place was something new, something forged in the cold fire of betrayal. And she had no idea what she was going to become. The conference room at Marcus Thorne's law firm was the antithesis of the Vance penthouse. It was a sterile landscape of glass, steel, and black leather designed to intimidate and diminish. Sunlight struggled through the tinted windows, casting long, somber shadows across the polished mahogany table. Julian sat on one side, flanked by Marcus, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. On the other side sat Eleanor with the formidable Beatrice Croft at her side. Beatrice, in her late 60s, with a severe silver bob and piercing blue eyes, looked as if she had been carved from granite. "The terms are, as my client stated, exceedingly generous." Marcus began, sliding a thick document across the table. "The Amagansett property fully paid, the Aspen condominium, an annual alimony of $2 million for the next 10 years, and a one-time cash settlement of $20 million. Beatrice didn't even glance at the document. She simply looked at Julian. $20 million, Julian? You are the majority shareholder of a company valued at over $40 billion. Your personal net worth is estimated to be north of $6 billion. $20 million is what you spend on a new jet." Julian stiffened. "The pre-annup is clear, Beatrice. Eleanor's contributions are acknowledged, but the growth of Aura Innovations is firewalled from the marital assets." "Is that so?" Beatrice said, her voice dangerously soft. "I seem to recall a young man in a shabby apartment in 1999 with a brilliant algorithm, but no capital. And a young woman who not only invested $250,000 from her family trust, but also used her father's connections to secure your first meeting with Sterling Pierce Venture Capital. Without that meeting, Aura Innovations would be nothing more than a forgotten PowerPoint presentation. That was seed money. It was paid back with interest." Julian snapped, his corporate cool beginning to fray. "It was foundational," Beatrice countered. "And we will argue that your so-called ironclad prenup fails to account for the sweat equity and foundational contributions Eleanor provided over 2 decades, which enabled your firewalled success. We will argue that she was an active, non-salaried partner in the creation of the Vance empire." Marcus Thorne shifted uncomfortably. This was the argument they had feared. A protracted, messy court battle would be a PR nightmare for Aura Innovations, especially with the salacious details of Julian's affair. The stock was sensitive to public perception of its visionary founder. Eleanor remained silent, watching Julian. She saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about fairness. He was weighing the cost of a public fight versus a private settlement. "What do you want, Eleanor?" he asked, ignoring the lawyers and speaking directly to her for the first time. Before she could answer, Beatrice held up a hand. "My client wants what she is owed, but she is also a private woman who wishes to spare her children the indignity of a public spectacle. So we have a counter-proposal." Beatrice slid a much thinner folder across the table. "Eleanor will accept the proposed alimony and the properties. She will waive any direct claim on Aura Innovation stock." Julian and Marcus exchanged a look of relieved surprise. This was easier than they'd thought. "In exchange," Beatrice continued, "for the full unencumbered transfer of all assets held in the Vance Family Legacy Trust." Julian frowned. The Legacy Trust was a small secondary vehicle he had set up years ago for a collection of more speculative non-core assets. It was a financial junk drawer. He barely remembered what was in it. "What's in the trust?" he asked Marcus. Marcus pulled out a tablet and tapped for a moment. "It's negligible, Julian. A few art pieces you bought early on some municipal bonds and a small private equity stake in a biotech startup, a company called Phoenix Biodiagnostics." Julian almost laughed. "Phoenix Bio? That thing, I wrote that off years ago. It was a $500,000 flyer I took on some scientist's pipe dream. They've never turned a profit. They're probably on the verge of bankruptcy." He looked at Eleanor, a smirk playing on his lips. "You want that pile of garbage, be my guest. It's yours." "We want it in writing," Beatrice said, her face impassive. All assets within the trust transferred to Eleanor's sole ownership, free and clear. "Done," Julian said, eager to close the deal. He saw it as a victory. He was getting away clean, keeping his empire intact, and all it cost him was a portfolio of sentimental junk and a worthless tech stock. He was trading his past for his future, and he was getting a bargain. Eleanor felt a pang of something, not regret, but the sharp pain of his dismissal. He saw this asset, this small piece of their shared history, as worthless. He saw her as worthless. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the poised, elegant Eleanor Vance was gone, replaced by a woman looking at a complete stranger. She gave a single sharp nod to Beatrice. The papers were signed. The severance was complete. That evening, Julian took Chloe to Jean-Georges, the restaurant where he had proposed to Eleanor 23 years earlier. Chloe, wearing a daringly short Balmain dress, posted a flurry of pictures to her Instagram, the champagne bottle, the diamond bracelet. Julian had gifted her a selfie of them kissing with the caption, "The future is bright. Love, #new beginnings, #power couple." Miles away in a quiet, borrowed apartment overlooking Central Park, Eleanor sat with the divorce decree and a slim file labeled Phoenix Biodiagnostics. The world saw her as a spurned wife, a casualty of a billionaire's midlife crisis, handsomely paid off for her silence. Julian saw her as a relic he had archived away. But as she opened the file and began to read about a struggling company dedicated to revolutionary biometric sensor technology, she didn't feel like a relic. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, not since she'd first seen the spark of genius in a young, ambitious Julian Vance. It was the thrill of potential. The junk pile he had so carelessly tossed her way might just contain a diamond, or more fittingly, a phoenix waiting for the right conditions to rise from the ashes. The first few months post-divorce were a study in disorientation. Eleanor moved out of the penthouse she had decorated and into a gracious but far less ostentatious pre-war apartment on the west side, one her family had owned for generations. The silence was the most jarring part. The familiar hum of the penthouse, the hushed footsteps of staff, the distant city traffic. Julian's booming voice on a conference call was replaced by a quiet that felt both liberating and lonely. Her children, Leo and Amelia, rallied around her with a fierceness that was both a comfort and a source of guilt. They were furious with their father. Phone calls with him became stilted and brief. Amelia refused to see him at all while Leo maintained a cool, formal distance. "He's replaced you with an Instagram filter," Amelia had seethed one afternoon, scrolling through Chloe's feed with disgust. It was a parade of manufactured perfection, Chloe and Julian on a private jet to St. Bart's. Chloe showing off a new Patek Philippe watch, matching Julian's Chloe redecorating the penthouse in a style Amelia called Kardashian-esque gaudy. Every post was a meticulously crafted jab at Eleanor, a public claiming of her former life. Eleanor's oldest friend, Isabella Rossi, a sharp-witted art gallery owner, was her rock. "Let them have their tacky spectacle," Isabella said over lunch at the Modern. "Flashy money screams. Wealth whispers. You, my dear, are a whisper about to become a roar." It was Isabella who pushed Eleanor to stop grieving the past and start auditing her future. One rainy Tuesday, they sat in Eleanor's new study papers spread across an antique desk. They went through the assets from the settlement, the properties, the bonds, the cash. It was a fortune by any normal standard, but a pittance compared to what Julian controlled. Then they came to the file for Phoenix Biodiagnostics. "This is the junk he was so happy to give you?" Isabella asked, peering at the initial prospectus. His exact words were "pile of garbage," Eleanor replied with a wry smile. The company was based in Palo Alto. Its mission was to develop non-invasive continuous biometric sensors using a novel graphene-based hydrogel. The science was dense, but the application was clear. Imagine a patch thin as a second skin that could monitor blood glucose, cortisol, hydration, and a dozen other markers in real time, sending the data to a smartphone. It had immense potential for diabetes management, athletic performance, and even military applications. The problem, as Julian had noted, was money. The company had burned through its initial seed funding, including Julian's $500,000 investment, just to get the prototype working. They were stuck in the infamous valley of death between research and commercial viability. They needed a significant Series A funding round to miniaturize the tech, get FDA approvals, and scale production. "He wrote it off because it wasn't an instant unicorn," Eleanor mused, tapping the file. "Julian has no patience for incubation. If it doesn't show a tenfold return in 3 years, he loses interest." "His loss," Isabella said. "So what are you going to do? Sell the stake for pennies on the dollar?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "But I'm not going to do what he expects me to do." A few days later, Eleanor made a decision. Instead of calling a broker, she booked a flight to San Francisco. She told no one except Isabella. She wanted to see this pile of garbage for herself. Meanwhile, life for Julian and Chloe was a whirlwind of ostentatious consumption. Chloe, unburdened by Eleanor's classic taste and fiscal restraint, was a supernova of spending. The penthouse was gutted and remade in chrome white marble and neon art. She insisted on flying private for weekend trips to Miami. Her wardrobe budget alone was more than the annual salary of a senior Aura executive. Julian, initially invigorated by her youth and disruptive energy, found himself increasingly annoyed. Chloe treated Aura Innovations like her personal credit card. She demanded a title, chief brand strategist, and a corner office, though her contributions were limited to suggesting celebrity collaborations that were usually off-brand and absurdly expensive. She was obsessed with social status but lacked the subtlety to navigate their world. She tried to strong-arm her way into the committees of old guard charities, only to be politely but firmly rebuffed by women who had been Eleanor's friends for decades. They saw Chloe for what she was, an interloper. The friction was beginning to show. "Chloe, the board is questioning these expenses," Julian said one evening, looking over a credit card statement that included a $300,000 charge from Graph. "We're a lifestyle brand, Jules. We have to live the lifestyle," she retorted, snapping a selfie. "Don't be like Eleanor pinching pennies. It's not a good look." The comparison stung more than he expected. He was starting to miss the quiet competence, the effortless way Eleanor managed their complex social and domestic lives without ever making it seem like a transaction. With Eleanor, their wealth had been a tool for a life of quality and influence. With Chloe, it was a gaudy costume and a surprisingly heavy one at that. He was bankrolling a performance and the applause felt hollow. He pushed the thought away. He had made his choice. This was the future. It had to be. Across the country, Eleanor Vance stepped out of a black car into the brilliant California sun. She stood before a low-slung, unremarkable building in a Palo Alto office park. The sign was faded Phoenix Biodiagnostics. It looked nothing like the gleaming, godlike tower of Aura Innovations in Manhattan. It looked like a place where real work, not posturing, was done. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door, leaving the ashes of her old life behind her, ready to find whatever embers might be glowing within. The interior of Phoenix Bio was a chaotic jumble of whiteboards, covered in complex equations, workstations littered with circuit boards, and the faint sterile scent of isopropyl alcohol. It was the polar opposite of Aura's sleek, minimalist campus. Here the passion was palpable. At the center of it all was Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to Julian's lawyer, the company's founder and CEO. He was a man in his late 50s with a wild mane of graying hair, glasses perched on his nose, and an intensity that bordered on manic. When his assistant told him a major investor was here to see him, he expected a suit from a venture capital firm. Instead, he found Eleanor Vance looking poised and out of place in her tailored silk blouse and trousers. "Mrs. Vance," he said, wiping his hand on his lab coat before shaking hers. "I'm Eris Thorne. I must confess I'm surprised. We haven't heard from your ex-husband's office in years." "Mr. Vance is no longer an investor, Doctor," Eleanor said, her voice calm and direct. "I am. The full stake from the Vance Family Legacy Trust was transferred to me in our divorce settlement. I am now the single largest private shareholder in Phoenix Biodiagnostics." Eris blinked, processing this. "He gave you the whole stake?" He couldn't hide his astonishment. Julian Vance had essentially given away a foundational piece of his company. "He considers it a write-off," Eleanor stated simply. "I'm here to find out if he was right." Debt. For the next 5 hours, Eleanor didn't just listen. She interrogated. She asked about the technology, the patent status, the burn rate, the regulatory hurdles, and the competitive landscape. Eris, initially wary, found himself impressed by the depth and acuity of her questions. She wasn't a dilettante. She had clearly done her homework. She had the mind of a strategist honed by decades of observing Julian's own corporate maneuvering. She learned the core of their problem. Their prototype was a marvel, but it was the size of a deck of cards. To be commercially viable, it needed to be the size of a postage stamp. That required fabricating custom microprocessors and securing a manufacturing process that was astronomically expensive. They needed $15 million. "We've been turned down by every major VC on Sand Hill Road," Eris admitted, slumping in a chair in his cluttered office. "They want a faster path to monetization. They see us as a high-risk, long-term science project." Eleanor looked at the prototype on his desk, then at the passionate, brilliant, and exhausted man before her. She thought of Julian's dismissive smirk. A fire ignited within her. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her decision crystallizing. "I am not a venture capitalist looking for a quick flip. Like you, I am invested in seeing this through. I will provide the $15 million. Eris stared at her dumbfounded. "You just like that?" "It's the bulk of my liquid settlement," she said. "But I believe this is a far better investment than letting it generate a modest 2% in a trust fund. However, my investment comes with conditions." "Of course, anything." "I'm not a scientist, but I know how to build a business. I know strategy, I know marketing, and I know the people who can open doors your engineers cannot. I want a seat on the board. In fact, I want to be chairman of the board." It was an audacious move, but Eris, seeing a lifeline where there had only been despair, didn't hesitate. "Done," he said, a grin spreading across his face for the first time that day. "Welcome aboard, Madam Chairman." Eleanor's transformation was swift and total. She didn't return to New York. She took a suite at the Rosewood Sand Hill Hotel, the epicenter of Silicon Valley deal-making, and immersed herself in her new role. She spent her days at Phoenix Bio, not in a stuffy boardroom, but on the lab floor learning the technology. She spent her nights networking, using the social acumen she had perfected over decades to achieve a new goal. She called in old favors not from the high society set, but from the quiet industrialists and financiers her father had known. She leveraged her old money credibility to vouch for Phoenix's new tech potential. She brought in a savvy CFO to streamline their operations and a regulatory expert to navigate the FDA. She was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the ex-wife. She was E. Vance, the chairman of Phoenix Bio, a formidable and focused presence. Meanwhile, in New York, Julian's own flagship project was hitting a wall. Aura Innovations was developing the Aura Sphere, a sleek home device meant to be the central hub for the Internet of Things, controlling everything from lights and security to health monitoring. It was Julian's answer to Amazon's Alexa and Google's Nest, but with an integrated premium health and wellness component. The problem was the health monitoring was proving to be clunky and unreliable. The sensors they were sourcing from third-party suppliers were inaccurate and invasive. The project was behind schedule and over budget. Julian grew more irritable, putting immense pressure on his teams. His relationship with Chloe became more strained. Her lavish spending and social gaffes were no longer charmingly rebellious. They were liabilities. At a tense dinner with Aura's board members, Chloe had drunkenly referred to the 70-year-old chairman of the audit committee as an old fossil, causing a silence so profound you could hear the stock price dropping. Julian had no idea what Eleanor was doing. He assumed she was living a quiet, comfortable life of leisure, hosting luncheons and attending gallery openings. He had relegated her to his past. He would soon discover that while he was busy trying to manage his chaotic present, his past was quietly, methodically building the future. And that future was on a direct collision course with his own. 18 months after Eleanor took the helm, Phoenix Bio was ready. They emerged from their quiet R&D phase with a press conference that sent shockwaves through the tech and medical communities. Dr. Eris Thorne, standing beside a confident and composed Eleanor Vance, unveiled the Phoenix Patch. It was everything they had promised and more. A flexible, transparent patch no larger than a small bandage that adhered to the skin. Using their patented graphene hydrogel sensor, it continuously and non-invasively monitored over 20 different biomarkers, glucose, cortisol, lactate, hydration, electrolytes, and even early-stage inflammation markers, with 99.7% accuracy. The data was streamed in real time to a secure app. It was the holy grail of personal health monitoring. The presentation included testimonials from a study with a Division I college football team showing how it optimized performance and prevented injuries, and a pilot program with a leading diabetes clinic where it had eliminated the need for painful finger prick tests. The reaction was explosive. Wired called it the single biggest leap in consumer health tech this decade. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature on Eleanor not as a socialite, but as a visionary investor, dubbing her the Phoenix of Palo Alto, who had resurrected a dying company. Within hours, Phoenix Bio was flooded with offers. Major pharmaceutical companies, wearable tech giants, and even the Department of Defense wanted to license or acquire the technology. A bidding war erupted. Eleanor, guided by her new razor-sharp board, decided against a quick sale. Instead, they accepted a massive strategic investment from a top-tier Swiss healthcare conglomerate, a deal that valued Phoenix Bio at an astonishing $7 billion. Eleanor's personal stake, the pile of garbage Julian had tossed her, was now worth over $2 billion. The news hit Julian Vance like a physical blow. He was in a board meeting reviewing the dismal progress reports on the Aura Sphere's biometric sensors when his CFO burst in holding a tablet with the headlines. "Julian, you need to see this." Julian read the story, his face draining of color. He saw the photos of Eleanor looking powerful and serene. He saw the valuation. He did the math in his head. In a single stroke, his spurned wife had built a company that was a direct and superior competitor to a key feature of his flagship product. Not only that, her personal net worth, built from the scraps he'd given her, was now approaching half of his own. The generous settlement, he had been so proud of had backfired into one of the worst business decisions of his life. The humiliation was immense and public. The financial press delighted in the irony, running side-by-side photos of Julian and Chloe on a yacht next to photos of Eleanor and Dr. Thorne in a lab. The narrative was irresistible. The flashy tech bro outsmarted by the quiet, classy ex-wife he'd underestimated. The fallout in his personal life was immediate. Chloe's reaction was not one of sympathy, but of pure, panicked fury. $2 billion! She shrieked, throwing an expensive vase against the wall of their penthouse. You let her have $2 billion. You told me it was worthless junk. I thought it was worthless junk. Julian roared back, the stress of the past year finally boiling over. We all did. Well, you were wrong. While I've been here trying to build your brand, she's been out there getting richer than me. People are laughing at us, Julian. At me. Her tirade revealed the terrifying truth of their relationship. It wasn't about love or partnership. It was a transaction, a competition. She saw Eleanor's success not as an interesting twist of fate, but as a personal attack on her own status. Her jealousy was corrosive, her insecurity a gaping maw. She pushed him to fight back, to crush Phoenix Bio, to spend more, to be bigger, louder. The pressure mounted. Aura's stock dipped on the news of a new, formidable competitor. Shareholders were getting nervous. The Aura Sphere project was now in serious jeopardy. They couldn't launch without a health monitoring system that could compete with the Phoenix patch, and developing their own was now years away. There was only one company in the world that had the technology they desperately needed. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Julian Vance, the titan of disruption, the man who had discarded his wife because she was part of his past, now faced a horrifying reality. His company's entire future depended on the one person he had tried so hard to leave behind. He had to go to Eleanor. He had to ask for a deal. The power had shifted completely. The decision to approach Eleanor was agonizing for Julian. It was a complete capitulation, a public admission of his catastrophic misjudgment. He had Marcus Thorne make the initial delicate inquiry. The response came not from Eleanor, but from the office of the CEO of Phoenix Bio. A meeting was granted, not in a neutral location, but at the Phoenix headquarters in Palo Alto. Julian was being summoned. He flew to California on his private jet, the same one he had once used to whisk Chloe away on extravagant holidays. Now the luxurious cabin felt like a cage, amplifying his humiliation. He walked into the same unremarkable building Eleanor had entered nearly 2 years prior. This time, however, the sign was new and gleaming, and the lobby was a sleek, modern space buzzing with energy. He was shown not to a boardroom, but to Eleanor's office. It was large and airy, with a view of the sun-drenched California hills. The decor was understated and elegant, a mix of modern art he didn't recognize, and comfortable classic furniture. It was a space that reflected her perfectly confident, tasteful, and entirely her own. Eleanor was standing by the window looking out, just as he had been the night he'd asked for a divorce. When she turned to face him, he was struck by the change. It wasn't just the chic professional attire or the way she held herself with a new unassailable authority. It was her eyes. The hurt he remembered had been replaced by a calm, clear-eyed focus. There was no anger, no triumph, just an unnerving neutrality. "Julian," she said, her voice even, "thank you for coming. Please sit." She took her seat behind a large, clean desk. She was now chairman of the board of a multi-billion-dollar company. He was a supplicant. The power reversal was absolute and suffocating. "I'll get straight to the point." Julian began, trying to summon his old corporate swagger and failing. "The technology you've developed, it's revolutionary. Aura Innovations would like to discuss a strategic partnership, an exclusive licensing agreement for the Phoenix patch technology for our home products division." "I see," Eleanor said, steepling her fingers. "You want to put our sensor in your Aura sphere." "It would be a synergistic move for both companies." Julian pressed on the business jargon, feeling hollow and desperate. "We offer an unparalleled market reach. You get your technology into millions of homes overnight." Eleanor listened patiently until he was finished. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. We're not interested in a licensing deal, Julian. His heart sank. What? Why not? It's a massive revenue opportunity. We've been advised against it, she said calmly. Our primary focus is on medical and athletic applications. Diluting the brand by associating it with a consumer lifestyle product that has a troubled development history is not part of our long-term strategy. Our partners in the medical field value exclusivity and focus. Tying our future to the aura sphere is simply too great a risk. Every word was a carefully chosen dart piercing his professional pride. Troubled development history. Too great a risk. She was using the cold, rational language of business to dismantle him. Desperation clawed at him. Eleanor, please, the sphere is the future of this company. Without a best-in-class health sensor, we're dead in the water. There must be a price. Name it. She leaned forward slightly. There is a price, but it's not for a license. We've had a number of acquisition offers since our announcement. We have not, however, received one from Aura Innovations. If you want our technology, Julian, you'll have to buy the entire company. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. By Phoenix Bio. At its current valuation of over $7 billion. It would be the largest acquisition in Aura's history. It would require taking on massive debt, diluting his own shareholdings, and giving up a significant portion of his control. And the ultimate irony, he would be paying billions of dollars to his ex-wife for an asset he had given her for free. Before he could even process the magnitude of her proposal, his phone buzzed. It was a frantic text from his head of security. Then another. Then a call from a panicked Chloe. Julian, you have to get back here. The press is everywhere. They're saying Her voice was hysterical. What are they saying? While Julian was in California, a desperate Chloe had made a catastrophic move. Convinced that Eleanor was trying to ruin them and hearing rumors of a potential deal, she had tried to gain some leverage. She contacted a notoriously sleazy hedge fund manager, a man named Rick Slater, who was known for shorting stocks. Thinking she was being clever, she fed him what she believed was inside information that the Aura Phoenix deal was a sham designed to temporarily inflate Phoenix's stock before a negative announcement. She hoped Slater would short Phoenix's stock, causing a panic that would hurt Eleanor and force her to the table. But Slater was far shrewder than she was. He recorded the entire conversation. Realizing that the real story was the attempted market manipulation by the girlfriend of Aura's CEO, he leaked the recording to a prominent financial blogger. The story had just broken. Billionaire's Mistress in Market Manipulation Scandal. It was a spectacular implosion. It was illegal, it was stupid, and it implicated Julian's inner circle in a federal crime. Julian stood up, his face pale. He looked at Eleanor. Her expression hadn't changed, but he wondered if she already knew. I have to go, he stammered. I understand, she said, her voice still impossibly calm. My offer stands. You have 48 hours to have your board present a formal letter of intent. After that, we move on to other suitors. Goodbye, Julian. As he stumbled out of the office past the smiling, vibrant employees of the company he had thrown away, Julian Vance knew he had been checkmated. His business was on the brink. His personal life was a criminal scandal, and the woman he had cast aside now held all the cards. The decision he made 2 years ago hadn't just backfired. It had triggered a nuclear explosion that was vaporizing his entire world. The journey back to New York aboard his Gulfstream G650, an aircraft that had once been his ultimate symbol of freedom and power, was a 5-hour descent into a personal hell. The hushed luxury of the cream leather and polished walnut cabin became a torture chamber. Julian was not flying, he was plummeting. His phone connected to the jet's satellite Wi-Fi was a live grenade in his hand, exploding with a relentless barrage of communications that charted the collapse of his empire in real time. His legal team's messages were clipped and grim, filled with acronyms like SEC DOJ and phrases like immediate fiduciary duty and potential criminal liability. The PR team was in full-blown panic, their carefully crafted narratives about Julian the visionary incinerated by the reality of Chloe the manipulator. But it was the emails from Aura's board of directors that were the coldest. The first was a formal notice of an emergency meeting upon his landing. The second, from Arthur Kensington, the 75-year-old chairman of the board, whom Chloe had so blithely insulted, was a single chilling sentence. You have squandered 30 years of market trust in a single afternoon. He landed at Teterboro Airport, not as a returning titan, but as a man racing to the scene of his own immolation. When he finally walked into the penthouse, the chaos was visceral. Chloe, her face streaked with mascara, was surrounded by open suitcases, frantically throwing clothes and jewelry into them as if she were fleeing a natural disaster. She was the disaster. "Julian, thank God," she cried, rushing to him. "You have to fix this. My agent dropped me. My publicist won't answer my calls. They're calling me a criminal." "They're calling you a criminal, Chloe, because you committed a crime," Julian said, his voice flat and dead. All the heat of his infatuation had been extinguished, leaving only the icy vacuum of its aftermath. "I did it for us," she shrieked, grabbing the lapels of his jacket. "She was trying to ruin you. That witch Eleanor, I was trying to fight back. You have to tell the SEC that. Tell them it was my idea, but you told me to do it, no. Wait, tell them I was confused. Tell them I was distraught over your divorce." She was cycling through defenses with the frantic, illogical terror of a cornered animal. Julian looked into her eyes and saw for the first time the terrifying emptiness behind the ambition. He had mistaken her voracious appetite for life as passion. Now he saw it as a black hole that had consumed him. "My lawyers will be in touch with yours, Chloe," he said, disentangling her hands from his jacket. "Frank," he called to his head of security, who was waiting grimly by the door, "please help Ms. Sterling with her things and arrange a car for her. She will not be staying here tonight." "You can't do this," she screamed as Frank and another security guard moved forward. "After everything I gave up for you, I loved you." "No, you didn't," Julian said, turning his back on her. "You loved the idea of me, the lifestyle, the status. You loved what I could give you, and now you've taken it all away." He walked towards his study, not looking back as her protest devolved into pathetic sobbing threats that were swallowed by the closing of the elevator doors. The bright disruptive force he had chosen over his wife was gone, leaving behind only the wreckage. The emergency board meeting was a modern-day execution. Held via a secure video link, the faces of his board members looked back at him from a large screen like a hostile tribunal. Arthur Kensington presided, his expression one of glacial disappointment. Julian's CFO, David Chen, presented the damage Aura's stock had plunged 38%, wiping out nearly $16 billion in market capitalization. The Aura Sphere project was now considered toxic by analysts. Their brand, once associated with innovation and quality, was now synonymous with scandal and incompetence. "The market has lost faith, Julian," Arthur said, his voice resonating with grim authority. "Not just in the Aura Sphere, but in you. Your personal life has become a catastrophic liability for this company." "I can fix this," Julian pleaded, the words tasting like ash. "We can issue a statement distance the company from Chloe." "It's too late for that," a female board member interjected. "The damage is done. There is only one path forward, one way to salvage the Sphere project and signal to the market that we are stabilizing. You must acquire Phoenix Biodiagnostics. You must secure their technology." Julian felt the trap spring shut. "Their valuation, it's astronomical." "A valuation you created when you handed your ex-wife the winning lottery ticket," Arthur retorted, his voice cutting like glass. "This board has authorized the acquisition. David will lead the negotiations. You, Julian, will have no part in them. And let me be clear, either you sign off on whatever deal David secures, or this board will vote to remove you as CEO by morning. This is your only chance to remain in the company you built." Humbled and powerless, Julian agreed. Later that night, sitting alone in the vast, silent penthouse that Chloe had redecorated in her gaudy style, he tried to call his son. Leo picked up on the third ring. "What do you want?" Leo's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth and respect he'd once held for his father. "Leo, I just wanted to hear your voice, to see how you are." A bitter, humorless laugh came down the line. "How I am? I'm watching the news, Dad. I'm watching your life explode because of a choice you made. A choice that hurt Mom, that hurt Amelia, that hurt me. And for what? For her? It's more complicated than that," Julian began, but Leo cut him off. "No, it's not. It's simple. Mom took the rubble you left her, and she built an empire. A real one based on something that helps people. You took an empire and nearly destroyed it for someone who embodies everything fake. So don't call me to see how I am. You know how I am. I'm with Mom." The line went dead. The click of the disconnection felt more final than any court decree. The negotiations were a brutal affair. Julian watched from the sidelines as David Chen, a loyal and competent CFO, was systematically dismantled by Eleanor's team. On video calls, David looked haggard and stressed, while Dr. Eris Thorne, now confident and empowered, spoke only of protecting his research. Eleanor's CFO, a sharp, relentless woman named Sarah Jenkins, went through Aura's books with a scalpel, exposing every weakness, leveraging every point of pain from the stock collapse. They demanded a price of $8.2 billion. They demanded 5 seats on the new combined board. They demanded that the Phoenix Bio division would operate as a semi-autonomous unit with Dr. Thorne retaining full control of its R&D. It wasn't a merger. It was a conquest. Julian, backed into a corner by his own board, signed everything. The final meeting with Eleanor was her choice of venue, the quiet, sterile conference room where their divorce had been finalized. It was a deliberate act of symmetry, of closing a circle. Julian arrived first. When Eleanor entered, she was flanked by Beatrice Croft, her lawyer, a silent, formidable presence. Eleanor herself looked radiant, not with triumph, but with a deep, unshakable serenity. He slid the last of the signed shareholder agreements across the table. "It's done," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You won, Elle. You got everything." Eleanor didn't look at the papers. She looked at him. "This was never a game, Julian. There was no winning or losing. There were only consequences. I never thought that company. I truly believed it was worthless." He stammered, a pathetic attempt at justification. "I was trying to be generous." "You were trying to be dismissive," she corrected him, her voice even but unyielding. "You assigned it no value because you assigned me no value beyond my role as your wife. You saw me as an accessory to your life, one you had decided to put into storage. You didn't give me a lottery ticket, Julian. You gave me a box of discarded parts. I simply had the patience and the vision to see what they could build. A patience you lost a long time ago." She stood up, gathering her things. Beatrice remained seated, a silent guardian. "I don't hate you, Julian," Eleanor said. And it was perhaps the most painful blow of all. His actions hadn't earned her hatred, only her indifference. "I am, however, profoundly disappointed in the man I once knew. I hope for the sake of Leo and Amelia you can find a way to rebuild some part of yourself that is worthy of their respect. But my part in your story is over." She reached out and placed a hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "I'm ready." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Julian Vance alone at the polished table. He was still the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. He still lived in a penthouse overlooking the city. But he was a king in a gilded cage of his own making, haunted by the echoes of his catastrophic decision. He had chosen flash over substance, disruption over devotion, and in a spectacular karmic reversal had been forced to sacrifice his kingdom to the quiet, resilient queen he had so foolishly cast aside. And so Julian Vance's spectacular backfire was complete. He chose the fleeting allure of a new model over the timeless value of his original partner, only to find himself forced to buy back what he had foolishly thrown away at 1,000 times the price. He lost his mistress, half his fortune, his untarnished reputation, and the unconditional respect of his children. Eleanor Vance, on the other hand, transformed betrayal into a catalyst for immense success. She proved that underestimating a woman of substance is a fool's game, especially when billions of dollars are on the line. What do you think? Was Eleanor's final move a cold-blooded act of revenge or the ultimate masterclass in business? Who was the real villain in this story? The cheating husband, the ambitious mistress, or the ruthless world of wealth they inhabited? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The hum of the ultrasound machine was supposed to be the soundtrack to the happiest day of her life. They were about to see their baby for the first time. Her husband, Torin, a man who could buy cities, held her hand, his grip like ice. As the doctor showed them the tiny beating heart, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. What a mistake. He thought his secret was safe. He thought his money could bury the truth. But he never counted on the doctor in that room, a woman who saw more than just a picture on a screen. She saw his lie, and she was about to reveal a shocking truth that would shatter a gilded world forever. The silence in the Bentley was a familiar character in their marriage. It was a heavy, opulent silence, cushioned by hand-stitched leather and the whisper-quiet engine, but a silence nonetheless. Torin Hawthorne, her husband of 3 years, drove with an unnerving stillness, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets of New York City. His profile, sharp and handsome like a Roman coin, was a mask of serene indifference. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry, the brilliant CEO of Hawthorne Holdings, a man whose Midas touch turned every venture into gold. To Katya, he was becoming a beautiful, unknowable stranger. Their home, a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue that Torin called the Observatory, for its floor-to-ceiling windows felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture had been chosen by him. Her life, she was beginning to realize, had also been curated. She had been a promising art historian at the Met when they met. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale, dinners in Paris, surprise trips to see the Northern Lights, a blinding diamond that felt more like a beautiful handcuff. He had convinced her to leave her job. An artist needs a patron, Katya, he'd said, and a historian needs to be surrounded by history in the making. Your work is me now. It's us. And she, blinded by love and the sheer force of his personality, had agreed. Now her days were a structured series of luncheons with the wives of his business associates, charity galas, where her only role was to smile, and where his chosen designer, in long quiet afternoons, staring out at a city she lived in but no longer felt a part of. The pregnancy had been her idea, a desperate attempt to build a bridge across the growing chasm between them. She thought a baby, a piece of both of them, would force him to see her again, not just the polished accessory on his arm. When she told him, his reaction was muted. A flicker of something unreadable in his cool gray eyes, a tight smile. A Hawthorne air, he'd said the words tasting of legacy and lineage, not love and joy. We'll need to adjust the nursery plans. The ride to the renowned obstetrician, Dr. Anya Sharma, was no different. He hadn't wanted to come. It's the 20-week scan, Torin, she had pleaded. We'll find out the gender. It's important. He had sighed, a long-suffering sound. I have the merger with Sterling Thorne, Katya. It's a delicate phase. This is more important than Sterling Thorne. She had said, a rare spark of defiance flashing within her. His jaw had tightened. Fine. I'll move my meeting with Mr. Sterling. But let's be efficient. Now in the sterile, quiet room, the scent of antiseptic cleaner sharp in the air, that efficiency was all he radiated. He checked his Patek Philippe watch twice while the technician prepped her. Katya lay on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her, her stomach bare and covered in a cold, clear gel. Dr. Sharma entered with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a sharp, observant woman in her late 40s with a reputation for being one of the best. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, ready for the big show. Ready as we'll ever be, Katya said, trying to inject some lightness into the room. Torin simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the large monitor. The technician, a young woman named Chloe, moved the transducer across Katya's belly. A monochrome world swirled into existence on the screen. It was abstract at first, a collection of shadows and light. Then Chloe pointed, and there we are. See that little flicker? That's the heartbeat. Strong and steady. Tears instantly welled in Katya's eyes. A tiny pulsating light in the darkness. It was real. A life. Her baby. She turned to Torin, her heart overflowing, expecting to see a reflection of her own awe. His face was stone. He wasn't looking at the heartbeat. He was looking at the vague outline of a tiny head, the curve of a minuscule spine. His hand, which had been resting limply on hers, tightened. She thought it was a gesture of shared emotion until he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. The warmth of his breath was a stark contrast to the icy cruelty of his words. "It's a mistake." The whisper was so low, so venomous, it was like a snake bite. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. The hum of the machine, the doctor's cheerful commentary, surely she'd imagined it. But then she saw the subtle shift in his jaw, the cold finality in his eyes as he looked away from the screen and stared at a blank spot on the wall. He had said it. He had looked at their child, their miracle, and declared it a mistake. The air rushed out of her lungs. The tears that had been tears of joy turned to ash, burning her cheeks. Her hand went cold in his. The room, which had felt full of life and promise a moment before, was suddenly a tomb. Dr. Sharma and Chloe were oblivious, their professional chatter filling the void. "Everything looks perfect, Katya. Limbs are all there. Measurements are right on track. Do you want to know the gender?" Her voice was a strangled whisper. I don't know." Torin released her hand and stood up, smoothing his bespoke suit jacket. "I have to take a call. The Sterling-Thorne merger won't wait." He looked at Dr. Sharma, a mask of polite apology firmly in place. "Doctor, please send the bill to my office. Katya, my driver, Thomas, will take you home." He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the screen again. He just walked out, leaving her half-naked on a paper-lined table with the ghost of his words echoing in the silent spaces of her heart. A mistake. Her baby. Their baby. A mistake. Dr. Sharma's cheerful demeanor had vanished. She looked from the empty doorway back to Katya's tear-streaked face. She turned to Chloe. "Chloe, could you give Mrs. Hawthorne some privacy to get dressed? And please hold all my calls for the next 15 minutes. Once Chloe had left Dr. Chesur, Sharma pulled a stool over her expression, a mixture of professional concern and something deeper. Something intensely human. She saw the devastation. She had to have seen Torin's chilling detachment. "Katya," she said softly, her voice a lifeline. Deep breaths. "Can you tell me what happened just now?" Katya shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. He said. She couldn't repeat it. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real. Dr. Sharma didn't press. She simply placed a comforting hand on Katya's arm. Torin's reaction was unusual, especially for a first-time father. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held Katya's. "I have been a patient of the Hawthorne family's preferred hospital network for years. Torin's medical file is extensive. I took the liberty of reviewing it before this appointment as a matter of due diligence." Katya frowned, confused. "His medical file? Why, doctor?" Sharma hesitated, as if weighing her next words on a scale of professional ethics versus human decency. There was a notation from his primary care physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, to cross-reference his records with any spousal maternity care. It was an odd flag, so I looked into it. She took a deep breath. "Katya, what I'm about to tell you is a serious breach of patient confidentiality. But given what I just witnessed, I believe it is a matter of your safety and well-being." A cold dread, far colder than the ultrasound gel, seeped into Katya's bones. "What is it? Torin had a severe case of mumps as a teenager?" She began, her voice low and steady. It was complicated by a condition called orchitis, inflammation of the testicles. The medical terms meant little to Katya. She was still stuck on the word mistake. The inflammation caused significant irreparable damage. Dr. Sharma continued, her gaze unwavering. We ran a series of tests on him afterward. I have the records here. Katya, Torin Hawthorne is and has been since he was 16 years old completely and irreversibly sterile. His condition is called azoospermia. There is a 0% chance that he can conceive a child naturally. The room began to spin. The black and white image of her baby on the screen seemed to mock her. 0% chance. Sterile. Irreversible. What are you saying? She stammered, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Dr. Sharma's voice was gentle, but her words were devastatingly clear. I'm saying, Katya, that Torin knows he cannot be the father of your baby. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a gunshot. His muted reaction to the pregnancy, his distance, his controlling nature, and the whisper. It's a mistake. The mistake wasn't the baby. The mistake wasn't the pregnancy. The mistake was that she had gotten pregnant at all, because he knew with absolute scientific certainty that he wasn't the father. He hadn't been accusing the baby of being a mistake. He had been accusing her. The drive home from Dr. Sharma's office was a blur. Thomas Torin's stoic driver navigated through the city traffic with his usual silent competence, occasionally glancing at Katya in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with what might have been concern. She sat numbly in the back of the Bentley, the plush leather feeling like a cage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a gesture that was now fraught with a terrifying new meaning. Dr. Sharma's words echoed in her mind, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. Sterile. Irreversible. 0% chance. The doctor had been kind. She had given Katya a glass of water, a box of tissues, and the space to let the initial shock wash over her. She had also given her a warning. A man like Torin Hawthorne, with his resources and his pride. He will not take this revelation lightly, Katya. He is not a man who likes his narrative to be challenged. Be careful. She had printed a copy of the diagnostic report from Torin's file, a document dated over a decade ago, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, detailing the diagnosis of azoospermia. Proof is your only power now, she'd said, sliding it into a plain manila envelope. Guard this with your life. Back in the sterile perfection of the observatory, Katya walked through the cavernous living room like a ghost. The Warhol prints on the wall seemed to scream in silent mockery. The cityscape outside, usually a source of comfort, felt alien and menacing. Her whole life, this beautiful, curated life, was a lie, a meticulously constructed sham. She had not cheated on Torin. Not once. The very idea was absurd. She loved him, or she had loved the man she thought he was. Her mind raced frantically, trying to find an explanation. Any explanation other than the one staring her in the face. A miracle. A misdiagnosis. A 1 in a billion chance. But Dr. Sharma's certainty had been absolute. The proof was in the envelope clutched in her hand. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, then how was she pregnant? The question was a black hole threatening to swallow her whole. Torin came home late that evening. She heard his keys in the door, the soft click as he locked it behind him. She was sitting in the dark, the envelope on the marble coffee table in front of her. She hadn't moved for hours. He switched on a low lamp and the room was bathed in a soft golden glow. He loosened his tie, his movements fluid and confident. Katya. Why are you sitting in the dark? He didn't sound angry, just weary. The powerful CEO home from a long day of empire building. We need to talk, Torin, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Can it wait? The Sterling Thorne deal is at a critical juncture. I'm exhausted. No, she said, her voice gaining strength. It can't wait. She gestured to the envelope. I had a very enlightening conversation with Dr. Sharma today, after you left. A flicker of something anger, fear crossed his face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a look of paternalistic concern. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, creating a deliberate distance between them. "Are you all right? Is the baby okay? You seemed overwrought at the clinic." The casual cruelty of his words, the way he pretended her distress was just hormonal imbalance, ignited a fire in her chest. "The baby is fine. But you know that, don't you? You saw the heartbeat. You also called our baby a mistake." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Katya, you misheard." The room was noisy. "I was talking about the merger." "Don't lie to me, Torin," she said, her voice rising. "Don't you dare lie to me. I heard you perfectly, and now I know why you said it." She pushed the envelope across the table. "Dr. Sharma showed me this. Your medical file. From when you were 16. He glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips, and the mask of the concerned husband dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. It was a chilling transformation. "Dr. Sharma seems to have a problem with patient confidentiality," he said smoothly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "I'll have my legal team address that with the hospital board. She'll be lucky to practice medicine in this state again. This isn't about Dr. Sharma. This is about you, about us." Katya was on her feet now, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You're sterile, Torin. You have been for years. You knew you couldn't be this baby's father. You let me believe. You let me think I was going crazy." "Why?" He stood up, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming in the dimly lit room. He was no longer the charming man she had married. He was a predator. "I didn't let you believe anything, Katya," he purred, taking a step towards her. "I reacted to a simple biological fact. You came to me, told me you were pregnant. I am your husband. What was I to conclude?" The implication hit her like a physical blow. You think I cheated on you." He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "The science is quite clear. I cannot have children. You are having a child. The conclusion is elementary, my dear. I was willing, for the sake of appearances, to overlook your indiscretion, to raise the child as my own, to give it the Hawthorne name, the Hawthorne legacy. All I asked for was your discretion. But you couldn't even manage that. You had to create this drama. It was gaslighting of the highest order. So complete, so audacious that for a moment she almost questioned her own reality. He was twisting her fidelity into a betrayal, her joy into a scandal. He was painting himself as the magnanimous, cuckolded husband willing to forgive her transgression for the sake of his name. The mistake he'd referred to wasn't just her pregnancy. It was her failure to keep the secret of her affair. "I never cheated on you," she whispered, horrified. "I would never." "Then how do you explain it?" He shot back, his voice like a whip. "A divine, immaculate conception. Did an angel visit you while I was closing the deal in Tokyo?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "I don't know. That's what I'm asking you, but I know I was faithful to you." He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. "Fidelity, a quaint concept. It doesn't matter anymore. You've made it matter. By bringing this out into the open, you've forced my hand." He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "You will carry this child. When it is born, you will sign over all parental rights to me. I will have a non-disclosure agreement drawn up, a very generous one. You will be well compensated for your services. Then you will disappear. You will move to Europe or California, I don't care. You will never contact me or the child again." Katya stared at him aghast. "You want to buy my baby? You want me to give you my child and just leave?" "It's not your child," he said, turning to face her, his eyes like chips of ice. "Genetically, it is half yours. But it will be a Hawthorne. It will be raised as my heir. You are merely the vessel, a very beautiful but ultimately disappointing vessel." The cruelty was breathtaking. He was systematically dismantling her identity, wife, partner, and now mother. She was nothing to him but a means to an end. an incubator for an heir he desperately needed but couldn't produce himself. Her mind reeled back to the central impossible question. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, the answer had to lie somewhere in the space between those two truths. And Torin, in his arrogance, had just given her a clue. He wasn't surprised by the pregnancy. He was angry it had become complicated. He had a plan already in place. This wasn't a shock to him. This was an inconvenience. Her fear began to morph into something else. A cold, hard resolve. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. And he had underestimated her. No, she said the word tasting of newfound power. He raised an eyebrow. No, no. I will not give you my child. I will not disappear. And I will find out the truth. For the first time since she'd met him, Torin Hawthorne looked genuinely surprised. He studied her for a long moment, a predator reassessing its prey. Then he smiled again, that same chilling, empty smile. You have nothing, Katya, he said softly. You signed a prenuptial agreement that leaves you with exactly what you came with, which was nothing. You have no job. Your friends are my friends. Your family is... Where exactly? That brother you never speak to. You live in my home. You eat my food. You wear my clothes. You are nothing without me. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can fight me. It's a battle you will lose. Miserably. He finished his whiskey and placed the glass down with a decisive click. The offer stands until the day you give birth. Think carefully about your next move, because I will be thinking about mine. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the silence. But this time the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the clarion call of war. He was right about one thing. She had a brother. A brother she hadn't spoken to in years because he'd seen the monster in Torin long before she had. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the contacts past the names of society wives and charity organizers until she found the one she was looking for, Liam Vance, her estranged, brilliant lawyer brother, her only hope. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding against her ribs. He answered on the second ring. Katya. His voice was full of surprise. They hadn't spoken since her wedding day when he'd pulled her aside and begged her not to marry Torin. He's a shark, Katya. He'll eat you alive. She had called him jealous and dramatic. Liam, she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. Liam, I need your help. You were right. You were right about everything. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. Katya. What's wrong? Where are you? Liam's voice had shed its surprise and was now sharp with concern. I'm at home. At the penthouse, she choked out between sobs. Liam, I'm in trouble. I'm pregnant and Torin. I'm on my way. He cut in. No hesitation. Don't say anything else over the phone. Are you safe right now? Is he there? He's here, but in his study. I'm okay for now. Lock your bedroom door. Don't talk to him. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just hang on, Katya. I'm coming. The line went dead. For the first time in hours, a tiny sliver of hope pierced through Katya's terror. Liam had always been her protector. Growing up, he was the one who'd patched up her scraped knees and stood up to bullies. He'd gone to Columbia Law while she'd pursued art history at NYU. Their paths diverged, but the bond had been unbreakable until Torin had systematically severed it, framing Liam's protectiveness as jealousy and disapproval of his wealth. He can't stand to see you happy, Katya, Torin had said. And she, a fool, had believed him. True to his word, 30 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. Mr. Hawthorne, a Mr. Liam Vance is here to see you. The doorman, of course, assumed Liam was here to see the man of the house. Torin's voice came over the internal speaker, cold and clipped. I'm not expecting a Mr. Vance. Send him away. Her blood ran cold. He was trying to isolate her completely. She grabbed her phone and texted Liam frantically. "He won't let you up. He's trying to block me in." Liam's reply was almost instant. "Go to the service elevator at the end of the hall. Now!" Her heart hammered against her ribs. The service elevator was used by catering staff and maintenance. Torrin would never think to monitor it. She slipped out of the living room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. She could hear Torrin on a phone call in his study, his voice a low, angry murmur. She crept down the long hallway past the gallery of curated art, her hands still protectively on her belly. The service elevator was utilitarian and stark. She jabbed the button and prayed. The doors slid open with a quiet hum, and there stood Liam. He looked older than she remembered. His sandy hair was a little shorter, and there were fine lines around his eyes. But those eyes were the same fiercely intelligent and full of a protective warmth that she suddenly realized she had been starved of for 3 years. He pulled her into a hug, and she clung to him, the sobs she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you. Let's get out of here." They rode the elevator down in silence. He led her out a back exit into a grimy alley she'd never known existed, a world away from the polished lobby of Park Avenue. The cold night air was a shock to her system. He hailed a yellow cab, and soon they were speeding away, the glittering lights of her prison shrinking in the distance. Liam's apartment in Greenwich Village was the complete antithesis of her penthouse. It was cluttered with books, legal pads, and a friendly-looking ficus tree. It smelled of coffee and old paper. It felt real. He sat her down on a worn leather sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made her a cup of tea. As she sipped the hot, sweet liquid, the story came tumbling out. She told him everything. The ultrasound, Torrin's whisper, Dr. Sharma's revelation, the medical report which she'd had the presence of mind to shove into her purse, the horrifying confrontation, the gaslighting, Torrin's ultimatum to take her baby and disappear. Liam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. He took the medical report and read it carefully, his lawyerly gaze missing nothing. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew he was a controlling bastard, but this is sociopathic." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. "Katya, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "He's a master manipulator. He isolated me and I let him." Liam shook his head. "No more. That ends tonight. First things first, he can't force you to give up your child. Parental rights are not a commodity to be bought and sold. His threats are designed to terrorize you into submission. But he has so much power, Liam. The best lawyers, the judges. He told me he'd ruin Dr. Sharma." "He'll try," Liam said, his jaw tight. "But Dr. Sharma has ethics on her side, and a good lawyer, which I will make sure she has, can argue that her duty of care to you, a patient in clear distress, superseded her duty of confidentiality to him, especially when he was using that confidentiality to perpetrate fraud and emotional abuse." He started pacing his mind, clearly working. "The prenup is another issue. Torrin's legal team is the best money can buy. They would have made it ironclad. He's right that you'd likely walk away with very little. But we're not going after his money. We're going for something more important, your freedom, your child, and the truth." He stopped and looked at her. "Katya, this is critical. You said you never cheated." "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "I believe you," he said immediately. "Which leaves a gaping hole in the middle of this. You are pregnant. He is sterile. He knew he was sterile. Yet he wasn't entirely surprised by the pregnancy. He was just angry it became public knowledge between you. He already had a plan to take the baby. This suggests he was expecting a child. Just not in this messy way." Her own thoughts, which had been a chaotic storm, began to clear as Liam laid them out with such logical precision. He was expecting a child. She repeated the idea, solidifying. "So, How? There are ways, Liam said, starting to list them on his fingers. Surrogacy, for one. But you're the one who's pregnant, so that's out. Adoption possible, but the timeline doesn't fit. That leaves assisted reproductive technology. IVF. The acronym hung in the air. In vitro fertilization. But IVF, with what she asked, confused. His sperm is non-viable. Exactly? Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a hunter's intensity. It would have to be with donor sperm. But you would know if you went through an IVF cycle, Katya. The hormone injections, the procedures. You'd know. She shook her head. No, nothing like that ever happened. They were silent for a moment, both staring at the impossible puzzle. A pregnancy without intercourse with a fertile partner and without a clinical IVF procedure. It made no sense. Unless... Liam began slowly, his eyes narrowing. Unless the insemination happened without your knowledge. The blood drained from her face. What? How is that even possible? I don't know, he admitted. It sounds like something out of a spy novel. But with a man like Torin, a man with infinite resources and a complete lack of a moral compass, we can't rule anything out. We have to start thinking like he does. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where could he have intervened? He grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Okay, let's be systematic. Think back. Katya, any unusual medical appointments? Procedures? Even a routine checkup that felt off? Any new vitamins or medications he insisted you take? She racked her brain, replaying the last 9 months in her head. Torin was obsessed with their health, but she had always seen it as part of his controlling nature. He'd switched her gynecologist about a year ago to a private clinic. He'd vetted a place called the Westwood Wellness Clinic, run by a Dr. Lena Hansen. It was exclusive, expensive, and catered to the city's elite. She'd had her annual checkup there. There was my annual pap smear at the Westwood Clinic, she said slowly. About 9 months ago. It was routine. Dr. Hansen was very professional, very slick. Anything else, Torin started me on a new regimen of prenatal vitamins about a month before that, she recalled. He had them specially formulated by a compounding pharmacy in Switzerland. He said they were the purest, most effective ones available. Liam wrote it all down. Westwood Wellness Clinic. Dr. Lena Hansen. Swiss vitamins. He looked up at her. It's a long shot, Katya, but this is where we start digging. We need to find out who owns Westwood, who Dr. Hansen is connected to, and we need to get our hands on one of those vitamin bottles. He looked at the blanket draped over her, at her exhausted, tear-stained face. His expression softened. But first you need to rest. You're safe here. Torin doesn't know this address. I moved 3 years ago after the wedding. The unspoken words hung in the air after she chose him over her brother. Tomorrow, Liam said, his voice firm with resolve, we start fighting back, and our first objective is a strategic retreat. You can't go back to the penthouse. We need to get your essential belongings, your passport, your personal documents, anything of sentimental value. We have to do it fast before he realizes you've bolted and locks everything down. The thought of going back into that gilded cage even for a moment filled her with dread. But Liam was right. She couldn't let Torin erase every trace of her existence. He'll be at his office all morning, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He has a board meeting. He'll be gone from 8 a.m. to at least noon. Liam nodded. Okay, we have a 4-hour window. We go in, we get your things, and we get out. And then we disappear while I start digging into Mr. Torin Hawthorne's beautifully curated world. I have a feeling we're about to find some very ugly secrets hidden in the fine print. That night, huddled on Liam's sofa, Katya finally slept. It was a restless sleep, punctuated by nightmares of cold whispers and icy smiles. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the dark. She had an ally, and they had a plan. The great Torin Hawthorne had made a critical error. He had pushed her so far that she had nothing left to lose, and in doing so, he had transformed his polished, docile wife into an adversary. He had no idea the war he had just started. The next morning the city was shrouded in a gray, determined drizzle that matched Katya's mood. Liam had already been up for hours, a pot of strong coffee brewing, his laptop open on the dining table, which was now Command Central. "I did a preliminary search on the Westwood Wellness Clinic," he said, handing her a mug. "It's a private entity owned by a holding company called Ethelred Capital. Very opaque. But I found something interesting. The listed agent for Ethelred is a law firm, Sloan, Finch & Associates." The name hit her like a jolt. Finch. The doctor who signed Torrens' sterility report was Dr. Alistair Finch. "Exactly," Liam said, his eyes glinting. "It could be a coincidence, but in this world, I don't believe in them. It seems Dr. Finch didn't just diagnose Torren. He may have stayed in the family's orbit, or at least his firm did." The connection was chilling. The doctor who knew Torren's most profound secret was linked to the clinic where she had her last checkup before the pregnancy. It felt like a deliberate, carefully woven web. "We have to go," she said, her resolve hardening. "The clock is ticking." Liam had arranged for a discreet car service, not a yellow cab. "Torren will have eyes," he'd said. "Assume we're being watched." The journey back to Park Avenue was fraught with a new kind of terror. This wasn't her home anymore. It was enemy territory. She was a spy on a mission. As planned, Torrens' Bentley was gone from the private garage. They used the service elevator again. Liam carried 2 large empty duffel bags. "Essentials only, Katya," he cautioned as they stepped into the silent, opulent foyer. "Documents, sentimental items, clothes you can't live without. Nothing he can track. Leave the jewelry he bought you. It's just another set of chains." The penthouse was eerily quiet. It was as if the argument from the night before had been sucked into the expensive upholstery, leaving behind a charged, toxic residue. While Liam stood watch at the door, Katya flew into action. She went straight to their bedroom, a vast space of cool grays and chrome that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a sanctuary. She grabbed her passport, her birth certificate, and a small box of old family photos from her bedside table. She packed jeans, sweaters, and sensible shoes, the clothes of the woman she used to be before Torren had dressed her up like a doll. She left the designer gowns and jewel-encrusted heels hanging in the closet like the shed skin of a former life. Then her eyes fell on the ensuite bathroom. On the marble countertop sat a sleek silver bottle. "Vie éternelle prenatal formula," the elegant script read. "Torrens' specially compounded Swiss vitamins." Her heart pounded. She grabbed the bottle along with a sealed, unopened one from the medicine cabinet. This could be the proof they needed. Her final stop was Torrens' study. It was a place she rarely entered, his sanctum sanctorum. The room was dark, paneled in mahogany, and smelled of leather and his expensive cologne. It was the heart of his empire and his secrets. "Katya, we need to go," Liam whispered from the doorway. "Just 1 minute," she said, her instincts screaming at her. She went behind his massive desk. She didn't know what she was looking for. His computer was password protected. But in his top desk drawer beneath a stack of neatly organized papers was a slim leather-bound folio. It wasn't a company document. It looked private. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page was a contract. A service agreement between Torren Hawthorne and a company she'd never heard of, the Genesis Clinic. Her eyes scanned the legalese until they landed on a phrase that made the air freeze in her lungs. "For services rendered in the procurement and cryopreservation of donor gametes." Donor gametes. Sperm. She flipped the page. It was a profile. A donor profile. Donor 734. It listed his physical characteristics: height, hair color, eye color, all remarkably similar to Torren's. It listed his academic achievements and a clean bill of health. But the name was redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. Then she saw the payment schedule. A series of large wire transfers from a private account of Torren's to the Genesis Clinic. And below that, A second set of payments. A monthly retainer paid to a woman, Serafina Dubois. The memo line for each payment was the same consulting fee. Who was Serafina Dubois? A consultant for what? And why was Torin paying a fertility clinic for donor sperm when he was supposedly trying to have a baby with his wife, Katya? Now Liam's voice was urgent. She snapped a picture of every page with her phone, her hands shaking so badly the first few were blurry. She shoved the folio back in the drawer and ran out of the study, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. As they were about to leave, the main elevator dinged. Her blood turned to ice. It couldn't be Torin. He was at his board meeting. The elevator doors slid open and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain. It was Jessamine Hawthorne, Torin's mother. She surveyed the scene, Katya clutching a purse, Liam holding 2 duffel bags, and her thin lips curled into a semblance of a smile. It didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," she said, her voice as crisp and brittle as old money. "Leaving so soon, Katya? And with your brother, the little radical." I see Torin's assessment of the situation was, as always, astute. Liam stepped in front of Katya protectively. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we're leaving." Jessamine's gaze swept over him dismissively before landing back on Katya. "Are you foolish little girl. Did you really think you could just walk away? Did you think my family would allow a complication like you to disrupt everything?" "This has nothing to do with you, Jessamine," Katya said, finding her voice. "Oh, but it has everything to do with me," she replied, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's Joy, filled the air, a cloying, suffocating fragrance. A legacy is at stake. The Hawthorne name, my grandchild. Her eyes dropped to Katya's stomach and her expression softened into something that for a terrifying moment looked like warmth. "You don't have to run, dear. We can be reasonable. Torin is angry, yes. He is proud. But he can be managed. I can talk to him." She opened her handbag and pulled out a checkbook. "You are carrying a Hawthorne. That makes you important to us. But you are not equipped to be its mother. Give us the child. I will personally see to it that you are set up for life. A new name, a beautiful home in the south of France. Anything you desire. You can live out your days in comfort. All you have to do is sign the papers after the birth and walk away." It was the same offer Torin had made, but coated in a veneer of matriarchal concern that was somehow more repulsive. She wasn't just offering to buy the baby. She was offering Katya a golden cage in exchange for her soul. "He is not a Hawthorne," Katya said, her voice shaking with rage. "I don't know who he is, but he is not a Hawthorne, and he is my son. Mine. He is not for sale." Jessamine's mask of civility crumbled. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with a venomous fury that was so much like her son's. "You ungrateful little tramp! You come into my son's life with nothing, and this is how you repay him, by opening your legs to some stranger and trying to pass off your bastard child as his." "That's enough," Liam said, his voice deadly calm. "We're done here." He took Katya's arm and steered her toward the service elevator. Jessamine's voice followed them down the hall, shrill and laced with panic. "You won't get away with this. Torin will find you. He will take that child from you, and he will leave you with nothing. You will be ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined." The service elevator doors slid shut, cutting off her tirade. Katya collapsed against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. She had known Torin was a monster, but now she knew the monstrosity was inherited. The entire Hawthorne family was rotten to the core. They didn't care about a child. They cared about an heir, a commodity. Back in the car, speeding away from that life for good, Katya showed Liam the photos on her phone. He scrolled through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Genesis Clinic," he muttered. "Donor 734. Serafina Dubois." He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a chilling realization. Katja, this is darker than we imagined. He wasn't just hiding his sterility. He had a plan, an elaborate premeditated plan to create an heir using a donor, and he was going to pass the child off as his own. But how did I get pregnant? She cried, the question still tormenting her. If I didn't have IVF, how did the donor sperm? Liam looked at the picture of the vitamin bottle, then back at the legal documents on the phone. I don't know for sure, he said slowly, his voice grim. But I have a sickening theory. It's called cryptic insemination. It's highly unethical, illegal in most places, and almost impossible to prove. But for a man with Torin's resources and connections to Dr. Finch's network and a private clinic, he wouldn't need your consent if he could bypass it entirely. The implication was horrifying. The vitamins from Switzerland. The private clinic. Dr. Hansen. Had her routine checkup been anything but? Had she been inseminated like livestock without her knowledge or consent? It was a violation so profound she couldn't wrap her mind around it. Now we have a name. Liam said, his voice like steel. Serafina Dubois. She's the key. We find her. We find out her role in all this, and we find out the identity of donor 734. He looked at Katja, his hand covering hers. This is our new mission. We're not just escaping Katja. We're hunting. They went to ground, retreating to a secluded family cabin in the Catskills. The isolation was a balm to Katja's fractured nerves. While she focused on her health, Liam converted the rustic living room into a war room. He hired a sharp private investigator, an ex-cop named Marcus Thorne, who began charting the dark constellation of Torin's deceit, the doctors, the clinics, and the mysterious Serafina Dubois. The first breakthrough came from the unopened bottle of Swiss vitamins. Liam had it sent to a lab for analysis. The results were sickening. It's worse than we thought, Liam said, his face grim as he read the report. The pills weren't just nutrients. They contained a powerful sedative and a cocktail of hormones designed to optimize fertility. The clinical words painted a horrifying picture. He was drugging me, Katja whispered, the violation stealing her breath. She had been an unwilling participant in her own pregnancy. Her anger, once a spark, now hardened into cold, unbreakable resolve. Soon after Marcus Thorne's investigation bore fruit, the money trail laundered through shell corporations led him to Serafina Dubois. He found her address in a discreet Soho apartment building. I have to see her, Katja declared, her voice firm. The time for hiding was over. They approached with caution. While Liam and Marcus waited nearby, Katja went to the building alone, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She buzzed the apartment. My name is Katja Hawthorne, she said into the intercom, her voice clear. We need to talk about Torin. After a tense silence, the lock clicked open. The woman who answered the door. Serafina was not the cold accomplice Katja had envisioned. She was elegant, with intelligent, weary eyes that held a universe of regret. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly, I knew this day would come. Please come in. Inside the minimalist apartment, the truth finally spilled out. I was a geneticist. Serafina began, her hands trembling. I ran a fertility clinic called Genesis. Torin came to me years ago, obsessed with having a biological heir he knew he could never produce. When I told him it was impossible, he changed the plan. He wanted a child that appeared to be his, using a donor who was a perfect physical match. Donor 734. Katja breathed. Serafina nodded, but that wasn't enough for him. He insisted the child be carried by you to complete the illusion. I told him it was illegal, a monstrous ethical breach. But he had leveraged my brother's gambling debts. Torin paid them, and in return he owned me. He forced me to orchestrate everything. The drugged vitamins, the procedure. Dr. Hansen at the Westwood Clinic was one of his puppets too. Her voice broke. I am so sorry. I've lived with this guilt every day." The confession was damning, but one final crucial question remained. Who was the donor? Katja asked, her voice trembling. Who is my baby's father? A fresh wave of fear washed over Serafina's face. Torin's cruelty has layers, she explained. He wanted the donor to be someone he could control completely, an insurance policy. He chose his younger brother, Michael. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Michael Hawthorne, the disowned artist, the family disgrace. Torin despised him, Serafina whispered. He found Michael, offered him life-changing money to be the donor, and forced him to sign an NDA and disappear. It was his ultimate twisted victory to use the genetics of the brother he hated to create the heir he would raise as his own. Armed with Serafina's sworn affidavit, Liam's team moved swiftly. They located Michael Hawthorne living a quiet, anonymous life in a small town on the coast of Maine. He was a painter of melancholic seascapes, a man haunted by a deal he had never fully understood. Katja traveled to Maine to meet him. Standing on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Atlantic, she saw a man who shared Torin's frame, but none of his menace. His eyes were kind. They were her baby's eyes. "I am so sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I never knew." In that moment, standing beside the stranger, who was the biological father of her child, Katja felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. He was not a ghost. He was family. The final confrontation was not a dramatic showdown, but a swift legal execution. Liam presented Torin's lawyers with their arsenal, Serafina's testimony, the lab reports, Michael's statement, and the threat of criminal charges for assault and unlawful insemination. The story, if made public, would not just tarnish the Hawthorne name, it would obliterate the entire empire. Jessamine Hawthorne attempted a desperate smear campaign, but against the mountain of evidence it was useless. Faced with total ruin, Torin folded. The divorce was quiet and absolute. The fraudulent prenup was voided, and Katja accepted a settlement that would ensure her child's security. She refused to take a penny more of his blood money. Torin relinquished all paternal rights in exchange for their silence on Michael's identity, a final pathetic attempt to control a narrative he had already lost. Katja walked away from the marriage with her freedom, her dignity, and the precious life inside her. 2 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She named him Liam after the brother who had saved her, and gave him the last name Vance. He had his Uncle Michael's kind eyes and his mother's resilient spirit. Michael became a quiet, loving presence in their lives, his art slowly filling with a light that had long been absent. Katja never saw Torin or Jessamine again. The last she heard, Hawthorne Holdings was in turmoil, and Torin had become a recluse in his golden penthouse, a king ruling an empire of shadows. He had his legacy, but he was utterly alone, having lost the future he tried so desperately to steal. Katja, however, had found hers. It wasn't a life of opulence, but it was real, and it was free. Katja's journey started with a shocking betrayal in the cold, sterile light of an ultrasound room, and ended with her reclaiming her strength, her identity, and her future. She escaped a gilded cage, exposed a web of lies that ran deeper than she could ever have imagined, and fought for the most precious thing in her life, her child. Her story is a powerful testament to resilience, the unbreakable bond of family, and the fact that truth is a power that even a millionaire's money cannot suppress. What would you have done in Katja's position? Let us know in the comments below.